So I've made two videos now about Apple's foldable iPhone. The first was about why Apple is making one in the first place, and then I made another asking the question I think a lot of people have, which was why would anyone actually want one or buy one? But there's one pretty obvious part of this whole story that I haven't really talked about yet, and that's what is Apple actually making and what are the features of the iPhone Fold or iPhone Ultra. So with Apple expected to finally show this thing off in just a few weeks, let's get into it. So to start, when are we actually getting it? Well, Apple's expected to announce its first foldable iPhone at its September event, alongside the iPhone 18 Pro and iPhone 18 Pro Max. There's a little bit of uncertainty about when you'll actually be able to buy one. Various reports have said that Apple's been having trouble getting enough of these things made, especially because of the folding display and the hinge. There's even been talk that Apple could announce it at this event and then make us wait a little longer before it actually goes on sale, which I do believe happened with the iPhone 10 back in 2017. We also still don't know what Apple's going to call it, which I touched on at the beginning, but for years we've all just called this thing the iPhone Fold, but more recently, the iPhone Ultra has been floating around, which honestly sounds like exactly the kind of name that Apple would give a $2,000 folding iPhone. But there's also been some disagreement about that name lately, so for now, Fold, Ultra, whatever, we're all talking about the same thing. So when it comes out, the first thing you're probably going to notice is the shape. So when it's closed, the outside display is expected to be somewhere between 5.4 and 5.5 inches, which is actually pretty small for an iPhone in 2026. But then when you open it, you get a much larger display, around 7.8 inches, with an almost 4:3 aspect ratio. The whole thing should be shorter and wider than a lot of the foldables we've gotten used to, almost like a digital passport size. And I think this might end up being one of the more interesting things about it, because you get this smaller phone when you just want to pull it out, check something quickly or send a text, but then you open it and you've basically got a little tablet like an iPad mini. Apple's also trying to make this thing ridiculously thin, which we saw on the iPhone Air, but a lot of people didn't really like the iPhone Air, so that'll be interesting. The number that keeps coming up is somewhere around 4.5 millimeters when it's open. So for some perspective, the iPhone Air is 5.6 millimeters thick, so this will be even thinner, which will be kind of interesting to see in terms of durability. Each side of the phone will be thinner than an iPhone Air. So fold it closed and it obviously gets thicker, but even then we're still talking about a folding phone that could be under a centimeter thick. Apple's reportedly using a mix of titanium and aluminum to keep the phone strong without making it insanely heavy, so durability obviously will be interesting like I mentioned, and it makes you think about the cases for this phone or how that's going to work. Will it be prone to damage like previous iPhones, like the iPhone 6? Nobody wants a $2,000 plus phone in their pocket that easily breaks, but they also don't want a $2,000 brick in their pocket, so we'll have to wait and see. Another huge thing is the crease. If you've ever used or seen a foldable phone, you know what I'm talking about, where there's some kind of weird visible line or indentation running down the middle of the screen where it folds. Some people get used to it, but some people switch back to a regular phone because of this. Wouldn't be surprising to see Apple have a really good fix for this. The display is expected to be supplied by Samsung. It's going to be an OLED panel, and the latest reporting points to a much thinner display stack and a crease that could be dramatically less noticeable than what we've seen on older foldables, so the Samsung Folds are actually a good reference point here. I wouldn't expect magic, the screen still has to fold, but if Apple can make that crease basically disappear when you're looking straight at the display, that's a pretty big deal. Now a lot of this comes down to the hinge. Apple's reportedly using some pretty unusual materials here, including liquid metal, which is really good at resisting deformation. And Apple's also been beating the crap out of the hinges in testing. And that leads us to something that I really didn't expect when the Fold rumors first started. Touch ID is coming back. Similar to the iPads, this basically means you will not have Face ID, and instead Apple's going to put Touch ID into the side button with the iPad form style. So kind of funny, we've got this completely new folding OLED display, a crazy hinge, two screens, a phone that costs more than some MacBooks, and we're getting rid of Face ID, which was Apple's huge feature a few years ago, and bringing back Touch ID. Very interesting stuff. But when you look at how thin Apple's trying to make this thing, it makes sense. Face ID needs space for all of those true depth components. The Fold is going to have 4 cameras in total. You're going to have 2 selfie cameras, one for each display, and 2 cameras on the back. The rear cameras are expected to be 48 megapixels each, with a main and an ultra wide. And yep, that probably means that there won't be a dedicated telephoto camera, unfortunately, which is pretty wild because when you consider how much this thing is expected to cost, cameras are usually a huge piece of the cost. There's been a lot of back and forth about how Apple's handling the selfie cameras, and at one point there were rumors about an under-display camera. But the recent leaks have shown some really unusual camera placement, including the possibility of putting the front camera toward the corner of the display. So that's a gray area that we should keep an eye on. Performance-wise, this thing is supposed to be an absolute monster. We're expecting an A20 series chip, around 12 gigabytes of RAM, and Apple's newer C2 cellular modem. So performance should not be an issue, but battery life might be interesting, as we've always seen with iPhones. There's been several different capacity numbers floating around, so I wouldn't get too attached to any one number yet, but everything points towards Apple trying to cram a pretty large amount of battery into this phone. We've also gotten some really interesting clues from Apple itself within the code of the firmwares of iOS 27, showing multiple batteries, so plural. You've got two halves of the phone, so you can put a battery cell on each side and have them work together as one system. And that's one of those little things that makes you realize just how different the inside of this phone has to be. But I think the biggest change might actually be something you can't see from the outside, and that's the software. Because think about this for a second. You're using your Fold while it's closed, and then you open Safari and everything looks like a normal iPhone. But then you unfold the phone and the screen suddenly goes from about 5.5 inches to almost 8 inches. So what happens to Safari? Does everything just get huge? In most reports, that's where Apple's adaptive software will come in. Apple's been pushing developers towards interfaces that can dynamically adjust to different screen sizes and aspect ratios, where you can resize the windows for iOS apps. And iOS 27 itself contains some pretty suspicious clues on where this is going. There are references to things like fold state, hinge angle, multiple built-in displays, and multiple batteries. So an app could gain a sidebar similar to the iPad and you could see more information at once, and layouts could start looking a lot more like what we've seen on the iPad. So that's a pretty big change for an operating system that's spent almost 20 years designed around one screen. Finally, there's still a few things we don't really know about. So MagSafe is a big one. Some leaks suggest that Apple could keep it, while other dummy units and reports have raised questions about whether there's even enough room inside of it for normal MagSafe hardware. That would be a bummer if it was left out, but that one's still up in the air. The phone is also expected to be eSIM only, which isn't exactly shocking at this point, as we've seen with the iPhone 17. Storage is also going to be very similar to what we have now, with rumors pointing towards 256 gigs of storage at the low end and potential for up to 1 terabyte. Colors are actually going to be a little bit limited. We've seen white or silver, and recent leaks have pointed towards like a really dark blue or indigo option. Moving on to price, this is probably going to be the most expensive iPhone ever. So most of the estimates are somewhere between $2,000 and $2,500 USD, which is a lot of money, especially when you consider that you're potentially getting fewer rear cameras than an iPhone Pro Max and Touch ID instead of Face ID. In MacBooks, you can get for significantly cheaper, especially the Neo, but you're also getting something that Apple has never sold before, which is an iPhone that can completely change its size, shape, and interface depending on what it's doing. So overall, that's what you should find really interesting about this thing, that almost for 20 years, a one screen, one shape, one interface phone, and now Apple's changing all three at once. Smaller phone when it's closed, a tablet-sized screen when it's open, and two batteries, completely new hinge, Touch ID coming back, a different camera system, and software that can actually respond to the physical shape of the device. So that's a pretty big reinvention of something that Apple has spent almost 2 decades refining. And of course, there's still the other question: why would anyone actually want this? I already made an entire video about that, and I've also made a video about why Apple is even making a foldable iPhone in the first place, especially after waiting this long to enter the foldable market. Now Apple just has to announce it. So that's the iPhone Ultra. It'll be interesting to see how accurate these rumors and leaks are when we see it live, when Apple releases it in a few weeks at this point. But if you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit the like button below and subscribe so you don't miss what happens when Apple finally does release this device. You can also follow me on social media. Links will be down in the description. And I also created an ebook for you guys if you want to get more out of your Apple products that you already own. The ebook is packed with tips and features to help you get more out of your iPhone, iPad, Mac, and Apple Watch. So check that out below. I'll have all the links in the description. So again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in my next Fold videos.